All right, let's talk Green Bay Packers. Obviously, one of the better teams in the NFC. They're a legitimate contender. They had a few holes to address, a few moves to make this offseason, and they've been involved in a few deals, some rumors going a few directions as well. A lot of moves still to be made, of course. But there's one decision the Packers made that's been faced with some criticism, but when you dive deep into the numbers, it was really an insanely, ridiculously smart move by the Packers. We'll break that down in just a second. But first, I'm Nick, that's Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, the Green Bay Packers face a lot of criticism when they signed their new left guard, starting left guard, Aaron Banks. A lot of people, when they saw the headline numbers, freaked out a little bit and said, this is a massive overpay. But now that the details have come out, this is actually an incredibly smart move, almost unprecedented in some ways by the Packers. When you look at the contractual details, let's jump into the story first, then we'll go into the numbers. This report was first sent to us, or we first saw it from the Milwaukee Journal. All right, from the report, the Packers have agreed to terms with San Francisco 49ers guard Aaron Banks. A source confirmed. NFL Network reported that Banks would sign a 4-year, $77 million free agent contract with the Packers. According to a source, Banks would likely play left guard, the position which he started for the 49ers. All right, that sounds like a huge chunk of change. 4 years, $77 million for Aaron Banks, who's a decent, solid, never really been a spectacular player anytime during his NFL career. But when you dive deep into the numbers, it gets really interesting. So let's go into the chart here on this next image and really talk about this and really dig deep into this. So when you look at the numbers here, let's focus on the left column here, the base salary, because we got bonuses, the per game and workout bonuses on the far right, but that's relatively small numbers. We're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on the base salary and the roster bonus. So for this season, the Green Bay Packers are going to only have a 1.5 million base salary cash allocation to Banks at the left guard position. That's obviously insanely cheap. The cap hit's going to be about 9 million bucks because of the signing bonus. Again, 27 million guaranteed, split over the course of 4 years. So this year they have him on a huge discount. Here's where it gets interesting. So if you go into next season, he's due a $10 million roster bonus, 9.5, and his base salary jumps up to 7.7. So if you round the numbers up there, it's about $17 million in terms of cash owed to Banks. But here's the interesting thing. That roster bonus is due a few days after the new league year, which is the start of free agency for anyone who's not familiar. Basically, what this means is the Green Bay Packers get to have an entire season of Banks at a massive discounted price to evaluate if they think he's worth market value. Because $17 million roughly is what a starting guard, a quality starting guard, not an elite, but a solid quality guard will get on average in the NFL. We saw this basically every single contract this offseason. So basically, what Green Bay did here is they get a year to figure out if Banks is going to be good. And then if he is good enough to be quality, then they only have to allocate $17 million next season to keep him on the payroll, which again is market value. So they get him at a discount in year one. If he's a good player, they get him at a fair price in year two and then in year three. If they decide he's not a good player, what do? They just cut him and they free up $17 million of cash, which, like I said, is the market rate for an offensive lineman, a left guard, which they then can immediately use that dollars to go out and sign someone else. So basically, they got a 1 year relatively free or at least extremely cheap flyer to see if Banks is their long-term solution at guard. If he's not, cut him, no harm, no foul. 6 million bucks at dead caps, per year for the next three. Not a huge amount to deal with. And then you free up literally the exact amount of money you need to go sign another left guard. This is perfect stuff. This is elite stuff from the Packers leadership. And this is one of the things people sleep on when it comes to Green Bay. And really, any news, anytime you get in the offseason, it's not just the headline grabbers. It's not just who you sign. It's the deals, it's the structures, it's the flexibility down the road. This is essentially 1 year prove it deal for Banks with options each year for the Packers to move on and free up cap space to find his replacement. Phenomenal job here by Green Bay. Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are on all of this. I knew I threw a lot of numbers at you guys there. It's definitely pretty deep in the weeds. But before I get over to you, Green Bay fans in the comment section below, now that you've had a few days to digest this news, now that you've seen some of the numbers and we've kind of dove into a little bit, how would you grade this acquisition from the Packers? Do you like it better now? Maybe it's an A move. Do you really still hate it? It's a D or an F. Or now it's okay. It's a wait and see. You give it a C. Whatever it is, give a grade for the Packers signing Banks. Put it in the comment section below. But Mize, over to you now. What are your thoughts now that you've seen the data and just everything in general right now with the Packers and specifically Aaron Banks?
Yeah, Nick, I think this is a really great move on a couple of reasons as to why it was really good. First of all, I think Banks is a solid player. We'll just go out there and say it. He's an aggressive run blocker. He's a big dude. I think he's been on the upswing. I think it was good coming off a really great year. I think he's a good player. So I think it's a good signing. I think the contract situation is the most important part. I think that's really, really interesting because there's also the new wrench that has been thrown into things. This year was the first year we saw it. One thing we're seeing in his contract is usually, I think, when you see a contract, the big hit is up front, it's front loaded, and then it goes down every year after that. But his is kind of like the opposite a little bit here. But I think we're seeing now every year with the unprecedented streaming market and everything going on with the NFL, the salary cap is getting absolutely grossly bigger every single year. So I think they're pricing him to where eventually, maybe next year, he'll even be under market value for what the position is as far as it goes up because of how aggressively the salary cap has been going up lately. I think it's a really interesting potential move they do there. But the second thing I really like is just the fit here. I think he fits this team. I think you look at him coming from a Kyle Shanahan scheme, very, very similar to Matt LaFleur's offense, is something he's probably really, similar, ready to run. It's not going to be a huge transition for him as far as his assignments and the type of plays that they run. I like that aspect here as well for Banks. So coming in to this offense and just being able to be somewhat familiar, I think that's it gives somebody a leg up. The more accustomed, the more familiar you are with the system coming in, it's going to give you a leg up to give you, a shot in the arm. It always takes a little while for these offensive line moves to gel. I think you see 2, 3, 4 games until the whole unit is cohesive and they're really like firing on all cylinders. But I think this gives him just that little bit extra boost. So getting a guy from a really similar system, I think that was a great move for the Packers as well. But just overall, I think it was a smart move by the Packers. Good fit. I think the contract makes a lot of sense, especially if you dive into weeds, giving them that out. I think that's really important. But if they want to keep him as well, I think the way that the contract grows is good to meet the new rising salary cap that we saw. Like how aggressively I went up this year is actually insane. So I think overall the Packers, they thought this one out. So I don't think people should be so negative on this one. I think it was a really well thought out move by the Packers. I think everybody should be pretty pleased with what they've pulled off here.
Yeah, you bring up a great point in terms of how contracts are normally structured, right? They're usually either heavily front loaded or heavily back loaded, right? What the Packers have done here is pretty interesting. It's basically an extreme discount on the front end and a very heavy discount on the back end. And the heaviest cap years are the two in the middle. That's pretty extraordinary. You don't see that very much. But here's the thing, even those two heavy cap years are essentially option years where the Packers, like I mentioned before, can cut, save the dollars before free agency. Remember, that's important. They can make the decision. Let's say there's a guy that they know is going to be available, and they say, hey, we're just going to go after that guy. We think he's going to be better than Banks. So we can cut Banks, no harm, no foul, free up all that. Don't have to spend that roster bonus. Don't have to spend his salary for that year, obviously, and then take that cash and go out and try and find his replacement. So they get to evaluate who's going to be available, evaluate draft prospects in the future before they have to even deal with those heavy contract years. And if they make it all the way to the end of the deal, the fourth year, he's going to be on such a discount anyway. So it just makes so much sense. This is just awesome job here by the Packers. But you bring up another great point about the fit. The Green Bay Packers are obviously in win now mode, right? We understand that. They were kind of a feel good, hey, up and coming, young, talented team in 2023. And 2024 was supposed to be the next step. Didn't really happen. I know there were some injuries to deal with, but going into the playoffs, they were as healthy as you could reasonably be. Obviously, no one was perfect. Teams are banged up, of course, but the reality is they kind of flamed out with an ugly performance against the Philadelphia Eagles. I know the Eagles were really good, but still, you're hoping for a little bit more for Green Bay going forward. I think this Packers team knows they're in win now mode, and they're going to go out and get veterans. I'm always disappointed when the teams are sort of vying for a championship. Like I said, win now opportunity, and they go out and rely on rookies and first and second and third round picks. I'm like, listen, if you're trying to win a championship, go get the veterans. Go get the guys from winning championship cultures, which Banks obviously is coming from the 49ers. They do a lot of winning, made Super Bowl runs, deep playoff pushes, things like that, which the Packers are trying to do. Don't go out and get a guy from, not to pick fun of the Carolina Panthers here or anything, but don't go out there and sign a Carolina Panthers guard. Don't go out there and sign a Cleveland Browns guard, right? Even though they have good players. Go out and get veterans from winning organizations, championship caliber organizations like the 49ers, bring them into the fold. Don't rely on rookies, even if it's a first round pick. Don't do it. You're in win now mode. Rookies are notoriously inconsistent, whether they even but if they could obviously bust out, it may take them time to develop. You don't want to waste prime years of Jordan Love when he's actually a little bit cheaper on trying to deal with a rookie guard to kind of figure out how to play the game of football at the NFL level. Go bring in a veteran. This is a really solid decision making across the board from Green Bay. The process of going after a veteran, the contract structure, getting a guy from a winning culture. You brought up the scheme fit as well. That's an outstanding point. All in all, this is just outstanding work by the Packers front office. Again, when it first came out and people saw the headlines, there was a massive freak out. And a lot of people said, what are the Packers doing? This is a massive overpayment. But looking at the details, looking at the fit, looking at the situation, it's clear and obvious this was a really, really, really strong move by the Green Bay Packers.